so today we're going to talk about section 11.3. This is just about implication. We are going to study the logical implication. And before we talked about what this is, but again, let's define what the implication is. It's a statement, if P, then Q. So it's a compound statement of P and Q. And the way we draw it is P arrow Q. Like that. Okay. So let's draw a truth table for the implication. True, true, false, false. True, false, true, false. Okay. Then, if P is Q and Q is true, then P implies Q would be fine. There's no problem. So that's true. If P is true and Q is false, this is bad. Then the implication is false. If P is false but Q happens to be true, there's no problem there. That's not a problem for the implication. It does not contradict the implication in any way. And lastly, if they're both false, there's no problem. The only thing that can go wrong for the implication is for the P part to be true and the Q part to be false. Okay. So here is a logical statement to convince you of this. If a number is divisible by 4, then it is even. This is a true mathematical statement, right? If a number is divisible by 4, then it is even. But are there even numbers that are not divisible by 4? Can someone tell me one of them? 6. Great example. 6 is not divisible by 4, but it's still even. But that doesn't mean the mathematical theorem, if a number is divisible by 4, then the number is even, is false. Okay? That's what's going on here in this second row. All right. Now, there are many English equivalents to the statement if P then Q. And it is good to write them down here and convince yourself that these things are equivalents. Right? Fortunately, we are not computers, and so we don't want to parse everything in a certain way. We have style in our language and art to it, and so there are many ways of saying an implication without saying if P then Q. Here is one. P implies Q. If a number being divisible by 4 implies the number is even. P only if Q. A number is divisible by 4 only if it is even. That's the only way for a number to be divisible by 4. It can't be divisible by 4 if it is not even. Q if P. A number is even if it is divisible by 4. Now that one's a little weird because it writes it backwards, right? It has the Q part first and the P part second. But it is logically equivalent. It's an English way of stating the implication that's not if P then Q. It's the same logical thing. Another one, P is sufficient for Q. So that would be a number is divisible by 4 is sufficient for the number to be even. And then Q is necessary for P. For a number to be even, it is necessary. For a number to be even, it is necessary for the number to be divisible by 4. See, this sounds wrong. This one sounds wrong. Right? If I was to put this thing about even and divisible by 4 here, a number is even, is necessary for it to be divisible by 4. Yeah, that makes sense. A number is even, it is necessary for it to be divisible by 4. It's not enough, but it definitely needs to be divisible by 2 if it is to be divisible by 4. Okay? And then there's something that we're not going to talk about just yet. Well, we will talk about it. Okay, so I'll postpone that to later. So those are a bunch of different English equivalent ways of saying if P, then Q. And in the implication, P is called the hypothesis, and Q is called the conclusion. So another example of a statement: if the president dies or becomes incapacitated, then the vice president becomes president, right? So P, the hypothesis there, is the president dies or becomes incapacitated. Q, the conclusion, is the vice president becomes president. So that's an example of an implication, and the vice president becomes president is the conclusion. Okay. Now we're going to look at now we're going to compound things with the implication. So P implies Q, and Q implies P. We're going to look at P implies Q, and Q implies P. We'll draw the logical table here, the truth table. True, true, false, false, true, false, true, false. Okay, the first row I'm going to fill in quickly because we just did it. True, false, true, true. Okay, the second one, we have true, true, false, true. And now for this thing on the right now, P implies Q and Q implies P. We need both the previous rows to be true. So if either of the previous rows is false, then the and statement is false. So that is the combined statement: P implies Q and Q implies P. So this one has a special name. This is called the biconditional. And logically, we write P and Q with a double arrow like that. So that is sometimes read P if and only if Q. The fanciest way of stating this is to say P is necessary and sufficient for Q. Okay. If you're giving a speech somewhere and you want to wow people and you're going to say a biconditional, you should use this one, the necessary and sufficient one. Okay? Because the dullards in the audience will be very confused about what you just said, but impressed because of your elocution. And that's the main goal of public speaking, if you haven't noticed. So this is a very powerful formulation, necessary and sufficient. Try that on your siblings at home, or maybe on your parents, and they'll think that the tuition money was well spent if they hear you use the phrase necessary and sufficient. Okay, now sometimes this isn't going to happen. We're going to be precise when we use language for these problems. But sometimes in English, we use implication language for a situation when we really mean the biconditional. And an example given in the book was, if Peter eats his broccoli, he gets dessert. That sounds like an if-then statement. But you know that it's not going to be the case that Peter didn't eat his broccoli and he got dessert. Right? Those two things always go together. What parents mean by that is usually a biconditional. All right, let's take a look at some other things. Let's look at not Q implies, and I should write not in the style that we are accustomed to. Not Q implies not P. This is another implication, but instead of P implies Q, we have not Q implies not P. Okay, true, true, false, false, true, false, true, false. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, not Q implies not P. Remember that having Q means we do not have not Q. And if the first part of an implication, if the hypothesis of an implication is false, then the implication is vacuously true. If the hypothesis of an implication is false, then the implication becomes true. And so I can automatically put true in the first row and the third row, because those are the situations where not Q is false. Now let's look at the second one. We have not Q, but we have P. This is a problem. So that one's false. Looking at the last one, we have not Q and we have not P, so that is true. Now notice something. This is the same as P implies Q. Okay. So when we have two truth tables that come out exactly the same, we call that logically equivalent. So supposedly, if P then Q is the same as if not Q then not P. Let's try it out with our statement about divisible by 4 and evenness, right? If a number is divisible by 4, then the number is even. Here, let's try it out with this opposite thing here. This not Q implies not P. So if a number is not even, then it is not divisible by 4. Oh, yeah, it works, right? It works. Okay, so this also gets a special name. This is called the contrapositive. Called the contrapositive. Not Q implies not P. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about today is something that I have not really seen before, is order of operations. I mean, I've seen order of operations for, parentheses and multiplication and addition and stuff. Like, we're all familiar with that. But these logical symbols have an order of operations. And it's as follows. Not, and, or, implies, double implies, or biconditional. Okay. Now, usually, like I said, all right, I have a PhD in mathematics, and I've never seen this order of operations before in my life. I guess it exists. But usually, in situations where it matters, people are kind and use parentheses to guide you along the way. So here's an example of what we mean by order of operations. I'm going to put this complicated statement here. Okay, so there's a bunch of things, right? But we learned, if you recall, we learned in the homework assignment that P and Q or R was different from P and Q or are. So it matters whether you take that and first or the or first. And so I guess that's why they need some sort of order of operations, right? So let's figure this one out. Okay, so not is first. So what does that mean? That means I'm going to rewrite the statement, but putting the not part in parentheses. Now ands come next. So I'm going to put all the and things in parentheses for my next rewrite. Okay, now comes the ors, and that means I can just put a parentheses around this. And now there's no ambiguity, right? Now we see what is the hypothesis of the implication and what is the conclusion of the implication. So there may be one or two problems like this on the homework, and you have to go in that order. Okay, the homework assignment due on Wednesday is going to be the following problems from this chapter: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 18, 20, 24, 28, and 32.